Let's be brutally honest right now. That's a big question.
I'm looking for someone who doesn't want to go to base camp, but they want to go to the very top.
Whether it's here, India, New York.
Civilization was born at happy hour.
That's what wins. That's what stands out. That's what people are interested in. That's what I want to know. The Hospopreneurs Podcast with James Henderson. Hello and welcome to episode 120 of the Hospopreneurs Podcast. This is another Hospopreneurs Plus episode, and today I'm joined by Sasha Reid, who is a business mentor, angel investor, and the CEO of Hyper, a global incubator that works to fund and launch tech startups. Having nearly a decade's worth of experience in the startup industry, Sasha and his team have helped over 350 entrepreneurs launch their companies. Sasha's mission is to ultimately empower every idea so that it has the best possible chance of success, regardless of the founder's experience, background, network, or capabilities. What a fantastic mission. So enjoy the episode today. Sasha is an incredible guy, and there's plenty in here, regardless of what stage your business is at. Hello, and welcome to the show, Sasha.
Hey, James, how you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. I'm very excited to get into the interview today. You've got an amazing background, and I'm really excited to open that up more on this installment of Hospopreneurs Plus. So, Sasha, firstly, though, why do you do what you do? I'm just going to cut straight to the chase there and open up with the big macro intro question. Why do you do what you do?
I had to think about this just before the interview, actually, because I know that you asked this for absolutely everyone. And I think after thinking about it for quite a while, it's just really helping people make a difference through problem solving. Ever since, I've been really young, I've always loved the idea of problem solving. I've always been really good at it. And it was really only I decided to, after 9 years, quit my job working in digital and then deciding to work for myself. I worked at a cafe basically for 6 months. I basically learned every single type of brew you can possibly have as part of that experience. But I really wanted to teach myself development to really just work with people that are looking to try and make a difference and see if I can be part of that journey with them. I was doing that for about 6 months. And then after that, I realized that I was running out of money and I actually needed to find a job. So I went online to Twitter, to Facebook, trying to find people looking for iOS developers, trying to build their dream and their journey and that type of thing. I ended up finding a couple. And for the next couple of years, I was just working with early stage entrepreneurs, trying to build a product and launch it. And throughout that whole experience, I think that just taught me that this is something that I really wanted to do and something that I really wanted to try and help people with. But the scale that I was doing it at back then was a little bit too small, and I could only help them with one really small part of that journey, which is writing the code. And there was a lot of things well before that were extremely important to the end result of the product that you were building. And that's the part that I really wanted to get involved with. And that's the part sort of that evolved eventually into Hyper.
So thank you for elaborating a bit more into how that evolved into what you're doing now. Before we do that, I want to explore just a little bit more around why it is that you're passionate about that thing in particular. What is it about helping other people to solve problems that really does inspire you? And ultimately, what is it that is fulfilling for you?
I think it's just the pursuit, for change. I've always wanted to be, and I guess I've always seen a lot of people that want to try and make that change, but just can't for whatever reason, whether it's they don't understand how to, they're trying to lean on other people that have done something like that before and trying to hope that the advice that they get can guide them on the journey to eventually make the change that they're trying to make. But I think that people innately come across problems all the time they really want to try and solve, and they just either don't have the confidence or don't have the skills or don't have the experience to try and do it. And for me, being that sort of that bridge between where they currently are and actually allowing them to get to that other stage and that other side is quite a fulfilling experience for me.
Beautiful. In that, I want to talk about change a little more. And so you recognize that there is change required in these people. So obviously there's a scenario where customers or clients or someone comes to you wanting change and they want some change to take place. And there could be some differential between the change that they want and the change that they need as well. How do you recognize that the change that's required in a person or a business and then change their perception around what's actually that they need to do? That's a huge question, and I'm interested to know where you go with it. How do you actually execute on that?
Yeah, so I think when a lot of people have that change that they want to try and make, they often, and this happens almost to everyone, they fall in love with the solution and not necessarily the problem. And so they'll say that, wouldn't it be great if this certain thing happens? And then they see something that does it and they think, wouldn't it be cool if we added all these features and functionalities and it was as big as this other product? And then eventually they move away from the problem they're specifically trying to solve. And I'll give you an example. So really on with Hyper, we worked with two entrepreneurs. Both of them wanted to really solve the idea of on-demand personal training. And this is well before any of the other personal training products were really out at the moment. And their concept around that was trying to have, wouldn't it be cool if we could get a personal trainer to drive all the way to your house, work out for an hour, and then leave and go to someone else's house and then work out there, so you can get that private experience, but you don't necessarily have to go to a gym and you don't have to have a gym membership for it. We looked at that, and once we tried to validate the idea and looked at the unit economics of that business as a whole, we found that that solution or that execution or that way of solving that particular problem just didn't make a lot of sense. And it didn't make a lot of sense because the cost involved for a personal trainer to drive wherever they are to wherever your place is, work out for an hour, bring all their equipment in a space that you might not necessarily have, and then drive away and go do something else. The cost per hour for them is extremely expensive. The space might not be really good or conducive for you to actually work out. And so we found that execution to that problem wasn't necessarily the right one. So we tried to boil it down to what it was that they were actually trying to solve. And it really was just trying to make personal training or training with a personal trainer more accessible to people when they're at work or when they're at home or when they're on their way to and from home and that type of thing, without them having to sign up for an expensive 12-month gym membership. And so we took that and we tried to change the execution of that so that instead of personal trainers coming to your house to work out specifically, we created it so that a lot of personal trainers who were trying to build their brand anyway, that were doing sort of group sessions in the park and that type of thing. So for them to have some sort of discoverability or some way to broadcast that they will be in a park right near your home or office at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. so you can just come along and jump in. It cost the trainer absolutely nothing. It's providing that same service and solving that same problem, and the economics and the way of solving that particular problem makes a lot more sense for the everyday person as opposed to the 1%, which is what the other idea was edging towards. So it's really helping people try and find the gap in between where you're at and where you need to get to, and pushing people into the right direction.
Yes. Thanks for sharing the example there, Sasha. We've gone deeper into personal training. Let's take a step back and look at Hyper more broadly. What is Hyper and what do you do?
Yeah, so Hyper is essentially a startup incubator or accelerator. And we really wanted to be the first point of call that people go to when they've got a great idea and they really want to try and make a difference. We've seen a lot of accelerators that exist at the moment, which are basically a heavily contested process where there's potentially hundreds or thousands of people trying to get in to get access to capital and mentorship. But we see a problem with that being that is just capital, mentorship, and network. There is no ability to come up and to help people solve that particular problem. They're really just the adjudicators of whether or not a problem is good enough to be within their program. And the other side of the industry is really focused around app development companies and that type of thing, where they're essentially trying to design and scope a project for you that allows them to utilize the developers to build that. And so the incentive there is not necessarily for them to try and create the smallest possible way to solve that problem. It's really to try and create something that they can utilize their full development team to try and create, and then the ongoing management associated with that. There's no sort of capital raising process. There's no sort of introductions to grants or any other sort of supporting structures there. So for us, we really saw that there was a massive gap in the market between the combination of those two things and really helping people at the very start understand exactly what their idea is, whether it's commercially viable, designing branding around that experience so that the target demographic they're going for can be utilized for it or can be attractive for it. Really understanding whether or not there's any grants available, helping them raise money against it, designing a customer flow that's super cheap to try and develop and to design, and then to try and validate a product that people actually want to use. So when you do actually build it, people are actually going to stay. And so we're involved in that entire process, but we focused almost all of our energy at the very start because we found that's where most people lose their way or need a lot more advice.
And that's led you to work with many different businesses or entrepreneurs. I've noted that you've worked with about 350 entrepreneurs so far. What are some of the success stories you've had out of that?
Yes, it's actually close to 400 now, which is crazy in the last 5 years. Yeah, so it's been an incredible journey. And I think I've just learned something about every single industry as part of that journey as well, which has been really great. But some of the things that I've really learned is that there's really great people that are trying to build a business that just don't either have the relationships, don't have the experience, don't have the skills, don't have the network, or just don't have the confidence. And a lot of the time, that's where the idea starts and ends. So for us, we really found that we just wanted to be as accessible as possible to as many really great entrepreneurs with really great ideas and get them and their idea into an investable state so they can actually start to raise the money and build the idea to make the difference they're trying to make.
A question that may interest people between 2 points there. So rather than focusing on a question around the people who have ideas and they're working out what to do, and the people who are just focused on raising capital and they know what to do, they just need to connect up and need those links. Something that might cross that is what makes someone investable. So ultimately, what are investors looking for when an entrepreneur is going through a capital raise and they're working with you? What is it that you're trying to do with that entrepreneur to make them attractive to an investor?
It depends entirely on the stage that they're at as well. So if you're at the very start and you're pre-revenue and you don't have a business because you don't really have any customers yet, the types of investors and the types of capital that you can raise for is very different from when you just launched to very different to when you're 12 months in and have whatever recurring revenue. At the very start, where predominantly we work with, the main people that are going to invest in your business or your idea are your immediate network. And that's things like friends, family, co-workers, colleagues, people in the industry that see the same problem but just don't have the time to solve it. Traditionally, they're the people that are going to invest because they understand the problem, or they are investing in you as a person and not necessarily the problem. And so we find most of the time, probably 60 to 70% of founders that raise money raise it through their immediate network. And then after that point in time, they get access to things like whether it's angel networks or angel syndicates or small retail investors, and basically people that have somewhere between 50 to 100K to put in to try and accelerate the existing progress that you've already made. And then once you actually do launch your idea, once you do launch your product or your business and you actually have customers, you then have something called traction. And if you can demonstrate the problem you're solving, the size of the potential market, the traction that you have, you can then really start to open yourself up to much bigger investments and investment sources, whether that's sort of large angel syndicates, traditional VCs, institutional investors, and that type of thing.
So you're an angel investor yourself as well. So making that transition into starting to invest more in businesses, what is it that you're looking for when you're investing in these early stage ideas and people?
It's about people and it's about the execution. If I see a really motivated founder who is determined to solve this problem, who's already invested himself, his energy, and there is a lot to lose for that particular person in failure, then I know that they're going to follow it all the way through to the very end. And in terms of the execution of that idea, it's really does it look great? Can I understand from a customer's perspective how this is being solved? Does it make sense? Does the price point make sense? Does the end vision of your 5 to 10 years, does the exit strategy potentially work? So I know that if I am investing, what that sort of end result looks like. Essentially, that's kind of what I'm looking for there.
Taking a step back into a more macroeconomic conversation, if we look at tech more broadly and this restructuring that's taking place in the world at the moment, what does the future of tech companies look like in your opinion? Obviously, you're addressing it from a very early stage. You're looking at these businesses before they build into the companies that we see in the news, for example, or in the media. What does the future look like in terms of tech companies, and are they the new pillars of the economy, or what? Because that's kind of how I've been looking at it, but I'm interested to know your perspective on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think specifically as part of the coronavirus change in the paradigm in the way that companies and businesses operate, if you don't have some sort of technology product, if you're not remotely accessible, if you can't service people who are locked in their homes, then you really are going to struggle to exist in the new world that's starting to develop on the other side of this. And that's something that we've really seen. And for a lot of businesses, it's not just creating something like an app or a website to try and access their customers. It's really trying to use the most intelligent way to try and get in front of them and to try and help them with that particular problem, regardless of what it is that they're trying to do. We've seen a lot more browser plugins be something that allows you to get into the customer's sort of workflow as quickly as possible, or to try and make suggestions to them at the right time. We've seen a lot of messenger bots that are actually starting to come back into vogue where they disappeared for quite a while. And so we think that the investment into tech and the investment into that sort of evolution of the way new people and new businesses are working doesn't have to be massive. It just needs to make a lot of sense to the consumers that you're actually working with so that you can solve the problem at the time that it actually happens for that particular consumer.
I want to review a particular idea that comes up a bit with ambitious early stage people, like first time founders who come in and they're like, yep, sweet, I'm going to start the next Facebook. I'd like for you to open up a little bit more around what a successful business actually looks like for founders, because I do know people who own multiple $100,000 businesses or $1 million businesses, and it's not a $1 billion business, but if you have a few, then that's a good base to have, but it might not be the one that's your big unicorn. So tell us a bit more about what a successful startup business ends up actually looking like.
At the end of the day, you really need to understand from the founder why it is they're getting into the business in the first place. When we hear people that have billion-dollar ideas and this is going to be the next unicorn before they've even done anything, before they've asked the market, before they've really figured out, what it is they're actually trying to do, then those sort of first-time founders sometimes have I guess, a bit of an incorrect lens to sort of look through why they're doing it in the first place. If it's always about money, I think you sort of lose sight of why you're doing it in the first place. For us, we really try and understand, for me in particular, I really try and understand, I've said this so many times already, so sorry if it's getting a little bit repetitive, but what problem they're actually physically trying to solve. And you need to have a passion for that problem too as an early stage entrepreneur. If you see that there's a massive gap in the market for rubbish collection, glass collection, disposal, recycling, something like that, but you don't really intimately care that much about that industry or doing that on a daily basis for the next 10 years, it may be something to try and give you a little bit of cash at the start, but it's not something you get heavily invested in, and it's not something you're going to enjoy in the long run. This has to be something that you're spending every moment of every day, at least at the very start, thinking about how you can try and get this off the ground and get this moving. And you need to have some sort of passion for trying to solve that particular problem as well. So whether it's trying to make a change in retail, whether it's hospitality, or whether it's any other sort of vertical, if you're really passionate about it, that's the first thing you should be focusing on. And if you are good enough and if you are solving a problem that's big enough, then money will eventually come if you do everything right. So probably more focus on that than anything else.
What's a problem that you have? This has just come up in that one. Obviously, you're discussing problems, like people are bringing problems to you and then solutions to those problems or supposed solutions to those problems, and you work with them to refine those solutions. What's something that you've been presented with that you just had no clue was a problem in that industry that needed dealing with?
One of the ones that's happened, keeping on the hospitality side of things, was a restaurateur who was over in Adelaide. We've seen a lot of hospitality tech businesses try and launch themselves recently, whether it's from loyalty, mobile payments, delivery, digital menus like Mr. Yum, that type of thing. And they're all pretty incredible innovations. But the one thing that I didn't actually know was a really big problem was suppliers and the way that supplier agreements and the way the payment cycles work and the confirmation of deliveries and how they're all facilitated from that side of things. We've seen this particular founder anyway was talking to us about how a lot of the time a head chef would order a certain amount of ribeye and then a certain amount of chicken breasts and a certain amount of XYZ. And then a week later, that chef might change job, might not be there on that shift. And then this order comes through and there's no one really to sign for it. And even if there is, the payment terms and the agreements of that particular contract may not necessarily be understood by the new chef or by the existing manager that was there. And so really trying to understand the payment terms, the payment cycle, the orders of the deliveries and people being accountable for how much and when something is supposed to come in was something that we really didn't know sort of existed. We just assumed that there would be a very small number of suppliers that have a very reasonably repetitive sort of cycle, but it's not. And so for us to understand, to bring visibility and accountability to that particular workflow that all of the restaurants and cafes have was a really interesting thing for us to jump into, to try and understand and then to try and figure out a way that all of the characters that are playing as part of that operation can come to an agreement. That agreement can be visible, the payments can be made, and there's no sort of confusion between the two.
So, Sasha, you mentioned there, even between me receiving your bio and then now, you've worked with even more businesses. So what are some of the success stories that you've had working with these entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so one name brand or home brand that a lot of people know these days is called Sheba. And so Sheba, for those that don't, is a female-only ride-sharing platform. And so the idea being that only females are drivers and only females and children are passengers. And that really came about from a friend of mine, actually, who got approached by one of the founders, George McEncroe, who asked him to try and help him come up with an app to try and solve this particular problem in a very similar vein to Uber. But the job was way too big for him, and he told me about it and ended up going to her house and her trying to pitch the idea to me. And the first thing I thought was, wow, like Uber is so dominant within Australia. How the hell are we going to try and create a product to try and break into that market? And the second thing was, being a male, it was very difficult for me to intimately understand the problem that you're specifically trying to solve without it seeming like I was coming from the wrong perspective. So her and I were talking about it for quite a while, and we basically ended up, she said, I would like you to drive for Uber, and I would like you to really understand the problem so that if you do want to work with me, that you can try and work with me on understanding how to solve this particular problem in the best way possible. And so I did that. I signed up for Uber. It took about 2 weeks. I spent the weekend driving, and within the first week, it was so obvious that this is an actual problem. I'd get called for a job on the app. I would go to the destination that this particular passenger wanted me to go to. And I would have to wait 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes for them to walk around the corner and to try and get into the vehicle. Things like they would sit in the back seat, always opposite, which is the furthest away, wouldn't really talk that much. And not to say this is depictive of every single female that got in the car, but it was the vast majority. And that was contrasted against a lot of the males that got in there that would sit in the front, that would talk to me about whatever, what night they had. Half of them would be very open with what they're doing and who they're with and that type of thing, which is the obvious conversations that I'm used to having with males. And when I finished that, I went back to George and I said, look, I totally get it now. I completely understand. It's not necessarily about getting people from A to B, which is what it is and has been for me with Uber. It's really about providing a way that they can feel really comfortable with getting from A to B. And they don't need to worry, and they don't need to tell their friends when they get into a vehicle. They don't need to record the number plates. They don't need to schedule the vehicle around the corner. So they spend 3 to 4 minutes walking in the dark to try and get in and all that sort of things. And so when we built Sheba, we built that from a safety and a security being ultimately the very first thing that people needed to look at and understand when they saw that particular product, because we needed that to stand out so much when people would try and compare that to something like Uber. And it was just fortuitous at the time that Uber was having a lot of issues with upper management and sexism in the workplace and all that sort of stuff. So we were able to just particularly on that particular idea, really break apart the noise and really get ourselves into where we wanted to get to with that one. That's been great.
What a story. Thank you very much for sharing that one. I want to move into a more meta conversation around what you actually did there, because that is an interesting way to execute that market research. And you're physically doing it yourself. Working with these sorts of entrepreneurs and really early stage businesses, they may not necessarily have injected any capital themselves to be rolling out this research. So I imagine you're going through this process with them to test the market. What are some other, because that was a great story. Have you got any other examples around other ways that you have done a bit of innovative or interesting market research to actually test these ideas?
Yeah, great. So there's another really great example called Magic Mountain based over in the UK. And when I was over there with my business partner, Tom, we were working with one of the managers of PwC, which is really interesting, actually. And they really struggled with the idea of personal motivation for them to try and get out and to try and do fitness on a regular basis. A lot of the apps, whether it's your Apple Watch or Nike Plus, it's all about recording how many steps you took and how much calories you burned and that type of thing. But there was no group accountability for that. And it was all based around your own personal motivation, which from myself included, I definitely struggle with. The idea of getting myself out of bed early in the morning when it's cold to go for a run, and then to have that be personally accountable for that with my friends. So at the end of the day, my friends can say, you did or you didn't do this particular bit of exercise was something that I could just get away with if I didn't want to. And so we really thought about how we could try and change that. And we did that through testing it on WhatsApp, a group on WhatsApp. And so we did that by creating this group. At the end of every single exercise that you did, you had to take a screenshot of your app or your fitness tracker, put that into a thread, and then we would keep a tally of exactly how much or how often people worked out and exercised. And at the end of the week, we would have totals and tallies. And we had this common goal that we always wanted to go for, which was something like 10,000 calories per week that had to be built. And then we would have streaks, and we really tried to test out the component in the cheapest and easiest possible way where we could change things, we could change the rules. It didn't really matter. And after doing that for about 3 to 4 months, we finally got to the point where we were really comfortable with this new paradigm of logging group and being accountable for group training. And then we decided to do the designs. We tested them out. We built the products. We launched it. And they've had an incredible amount of success by partnering up with things like 12WBT. They've got Fitness First over in the UK that's partnering up with them as well. And they just closed, I think it was a £300,000 investment with a product that's only been live for about 6 months. So all that sort of work that we did to really figure out how the solution that we created could be really engaging, fun, and really have accountability in the forefront really paid off towards the end, which is great.
That's excellent. And what a story there as well. Sasha, something else that I'm thinking about in your answer there is around gamifying health and fitness. That industry is something that's developed a lot further down that road. Have you seen anyone else doing gamification that's you've seen has been quite innovative or successful in the way they're doing things? I'm interested to know what you're seeing there, because once they can just get their user base to be inspired to actually do things towards the goal that they're trying to make their users achieve, then that's incredibly powerful, because then they can actually move their market in the way that they want.
Yeah, for sure. I think gamification is something that is really important, but I think ultimately it's really about motivation and trying to get people into that product, into that app as frequently as humanly possible. Gamification is one of the tools of that, which is really cool. When we originally were working with Magic Mountain, we actually consulted with a guy who has a PhD in gamification called Zach. And I can give you the link after this if you like. And the first thing he said to me, which really honestly resonated with me quite a bit, it was the idea that gamification isn't a leaderboard and it's not awards and it's not tokens and points. It can't be. If it is that simple, then everyone will be doing it and every product would do it and everyone will be addicted to every app. It's not the way that it works. You need to try and figure out exactly what the core objectives of the user are and to try and influence them to repetitively do that over and over again so they see enough value in it, and then they see enough value and constantly want to be in there to be part of that for a long period of time. So whether it's a business model around subscriptions, whether that's pay for certain components, or whether it's just you're getting money from the data or from them being physically within the platform through ads, it's getting them to do the things that you want to do by incentivizing that intelligently through something like gamification. And I think that's a really important distinction. We've seen some products that add in a sort of a leaderboard that doesn't really have any reason or point to. And I think in the early stage of the App Store, when Apple tried to create the Game Center and a lot of games and a lot of products tried to put in things like leaderboards and whatnot, no one really ever looked at it because it was just that bolt-on that didn't really add any sort of value for what people are looking to try and do. And so it's really trying to create something that really incentivizes both intrinsically and extrinsically the reason for why someone's actually doing what they're actually trying to do.
And that's something in gamification is about intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Without going into that too much, I want to go back to the health and fitness road and just ask you a quick question. There's like wearable tech over the last few years that's really grown. Are more people building Fitbit apps or Apple Watch apps? Are people building applications that actually really utilize that tech a lot more? Have you seen that coming across your desk anyway?
Not really, to be honest. I think that the two things that we've seen a lot less of, first one, social media. We know that because to get into social media is extremely difficult. You need to build something that is most likely free because you can't charge for it. And then to try and penetrate friendship groups so that you get the influencer within that friendship group to want to sell this product to the other people within their friendship group. Because if everyone's not using it, then no one's using it. And a lot of capital needs to go into something like that. So we've seen a very few social media products that have been out there recently or come across our desk. The same is happening with fitness, funny enough. There are so many fitness-based products, whether it's things like you're running from zombies and you need to try and exercise frequently to make sure they don't catch you, whether that's on the run or before the run, whether it's point-based systems, whether it's friendship circle-based systems, whether it's things like your Nike Run or Runkeeper or Apple Fitness and that type of thing. It has been done so many times that the motivation for people to try and see something different and see a gap to go, okay, cool, wouldn't it be cool if it did this? There's not a lot of that inspiration because a lot of that need is actually being met. Ironically, not a lot of new fitness apps are coming across our desk at all.
What is coming? What are you seeing that could be the next wave in tech businesses to really come through? From what I've seen, it looks like there might be more collaborative applications that allow people to obviously work together in this digital environment. What's that next thing that people are going to be looking to?
Yeah, I think we always have something that blows up and people gravitate towards that as being a new way to approach their particular idea. When you look at, was it like 4 or 5 years ago? It was something like augmented reality was a massive thing because of Pokemon Go. And I think every single idea that we came across our desk was always, we want to, incentivize people to go into retail stores through augmented reality by people picking up discounts and tokens and then going in store to try and shop for them, or you find digital sort of money. We had so many ideas. Every single idea that came through, it was a really terrible and really expensive way to solve that particular problem when you could do it for a third of the price to try and get something live that would actually have a much better customer experience. And we found the same thing happen with blockchain. As soon as Bitcoin came around, everyone thought it was the new next big thing, having a distributable public ledger, essentially, or a public database. And so many people gravitated towards that because of Bitcoin and because there was so much money in it. And a lot of the time to try and get a developer to develop in blockchain, it's an incredibly expensive exercise. And a lot of the time, you don't actually need to have that level of public sort of authenticity or credibility for the database that you're building. A lot of the time, whether it's something like being able to rent out a car parking spot or track the history of a vehicle so you know the previous owners and the new owners, a lot of that sort of stuff people thought might be perfect for something like blockchain. But really, you just need a trusted single database that can be easily accessible and reasonably well known to solve that problem in a much more efficient way. These days, there's not necessarily anything that is that popular apart from on demand. It's just a theme that we've seen constantly where, and especially brought to light a little bit more through something like COVID, where being able to receive a product or a service as quickly as humanly possible in the cheapest humanly possible way is something that I think every brand and every idea and everyone's starting to move towards, just because it is really the next step of part of our digital economy and where it's really heading as part of a post-COVID world.
What are the implications of that on-demand economy? How does that affect the quality of product as well? When you're looking at, say, for example, and we've dealt with this a bit on Hospopreneurs and on a few of our other programs, what does it actually do to the trajectory of quality in that industry if you've got to say a perishable good?
I think it really just comes down to the way that the world's moving today in terms of convenience, and convenience being something that people are happy to pay for. I really do think that it changes the way that brands need to look at that customer experience, because the experience that a lot of restaurants and a lot of perishable good type businesses have is that it's not about the in-store experience anymore. It's all about the online and the final execution of the delivery experience. We've seen a lot of packaging get substantially better, and that sort of unboxing experience, something that Apple's really pioneered for such a long time. So that when you open it, it's not just a really basic box with the thing that you bought and you can just throw the box away and you're done. The material is getting much better. The printing is getting better. The fabrics are getting better. The paper that's used to cushion it's getting much better. We're telling a story through opening this product so that you're getting to the stage where you don't actually want to remove that package or that sort of box or that unboxing experience at all. You want to try and keep it. And I think that's combined not necessarily with perishables, but that's combined with one of the most popular topics on YouTube almost of all time. Well, the first one's music videos, but the second one is unboxing. And you've probably seen that with so many different unboxing videos. Everyone's doing their own unboxing bit. It's because people just love to watch that. They want to see a product that gets unraveled for the first time and exposed, something they don't necessarily have to pay for, but that experience is something that people really do cherish. And we're seeing a lot of, as part of the on-demand revolution, people focus a lot more on the presentation and the unwrapping and that, I guess, that first initial experience that people are having, whether it's perishables or not. That's something that's becoming much more important.
Sasha, what are you learning about or exploring at the moment? So what is it that you're focused on building? Where are you pushing forward?
I think for me, just given the whole COVID situation with everyone having to be at home and Melbourne being in stage 4 lockdown, I've started to pay a lot more attention to my mental health. And something I actually didn't know at the very start of this whole sort of lockdown process. But within the first week, I was really struggling with being alone, not getting access to friends, not being around and out in the community, interacting with people, given that I'm quite extroverted. And so I went to go see a psychologist who told me after a few different tests that I actually do have ADHD, which is something that I'm now medicated for. And following along the lines of that, I really did want to try and discover a lot more about the condition as a whole, who has it, what personality types have it, and then just try and understand a little bit more about how to try and improve your mental health in something like a lockdown, and then what else you can be doing to try and engage your brain and to try and make sure that you don't go a little bit crazy when the usual supporting mechanisms are just no longer there for you.
That demonstrates as well your explanation there around how you're processing that in an environment where you said you're extroverted and you want to be socializing and dealing with people, and you have this situation that's come up and this knowledge about yourself that you're now trying to process in almost total physical solitude. It's interesting hearing your answer there as well, Sasha. And now that people are locked away, they're unable to do a lot of the things that they would want to be doing. So it's an interesting world to be processing these sorts of things in. I've had wildly different answers over the last few years from guests talking about things that they're learning about, and I guess to relate that even back to the work that you're doing. One of my favorite podcasts is This Week in Startups with Jason Calacanis. And he invested in Calm, which has obviously been doing incredibly well. That's a great app that deals with exactly what you're talking about. It's been doing very well recently, particularly in the environment that we're in. So it's interesting there to even hear that's a world that you're dealing with personally and professionally. Have you thought about doing something in that space?
Yeah, so as part of Hyper, we have a pretty strict policy of the founders and the people that work there not actually creating their own ideas, just because there's a fair bit of conflict of interest that could potentially happen when we're dealing with the secrecy of other people's ideas. But it is something I'm becoming more and more passionate about. And I think through that, I'm becoming a lot more open as well about that and about how I handle it, specifically for a lot of entrepreneurs that we work with who most likely have the same thing with the stresses of whether it's money, whether or not this will work, whether it's the emotional stress of being vulnerable and being open. And so really spending a little bit more time on mentoring them through that process and what that looks like and the coping mechanisms that I use to try and help myself along the way. And then trying to open myself up a little bit more, I think, to the rest of the people in the community to know that you don't necessarily need to be perfect in order to make a difference. Most people have issues. Most people have their own drawbacks in some way that helps offset the things that they do really well. And it's really just a combination of that and being open and honest about that with everyone that you work with.
And as you mentioned there, even if you don't execute on it personally, it could be something that's valuable to a new entrepreneur who comes in and goes, hey, I've got this great idea for this application. It might be something that you particularly passionate about and inspired by, and you've got all these great ideas for it. So you might be able to absolutely help them in the process of doing that. Before I wrap up and get to the last couple of questions in the interview, I want to ask you a little bit more on creativity, because you obviously deal in a very abstract world with these entrepreneurs who are playing with creative ideas, and you're playing with those ideas with them. How do you work through that process? Do you have a formalized process to work through these creative ideas, or do you have something else that you use?
We've got a fairly strong process that we've been developing for about 5 years. The first part of that is the founders sort of filling what we call a foundation document, which goes through the idea, their proposed solution, the people they know, the strengths that they particularly have. And we take that into an internal workshop where we have people from every single discipline that we have at Hyper, whether that's a designer, whether that's a product manager, whether that's myself, a commercial strategist, and some of the mentors that we've got. And we really try and figure out, okay, cool. With everything they've mentioned, what is the problem that they're trying to solve? What are some creative ways that we can try and solve that? And we can be as creative and weird as we possibly can. And we don't include the founder as part of that meeting because we need to be in a safe space where we can say things that might not work. And with all those ideas, we then take those through and look at the lens through, okay, what partnerships does that founder have access to and what can we connect them up with? And then what revenue streams or commercialization opportunities are there for that particular product? And then once we have all of those, we can then start to look at the crazy ideas that we have and either get rid of those because they don't make sense, or we can help make a decision on some of those because you know what, there is a really strong subscription-based model with an affiliate and referral network model that might work really well with this. So let's stick with this and see how far this can go. And then we start to design it out from there. So there is a fairly sort of strong process that we go through, but we really want to try and push to the founder's strengths. We want to push to our strengths, and we want to make sure ultimately this is commercially viable. So the culmination of those things is what yields the best products in our opinion.
Fantastic. Thank you for fleshing that out, Sasha. Last couple of questions I have for you. One that I like to ask in every interview, or as many as possible, is what is your biggest challenge right now? So what's something that you're dealing with that is providing friction for you and your work at the moment?
I think it's culture, honestly, within the business. It's so hard to go from something that everyone's in the same room every single day, vibing off each other. We regularly get lunch together, we go for drinks together, that type of thing. And to be completely isolated and separated from everyone that you work with and the interactions you have are reasonably artificial, being through something like video chat or a phone call or something like that. And trying to maintain that culture and that desire to work and that creativity that really does come from a close bond that you have with the people that you work with. For me, trying to create opportunities around connecting those people and trying to provide, I guess, bridges or the glue that still maintains the culture that we have with a business of about 16 people spread across the world is really hard and something I'm still working on today.
I'm going to share this one on the show. I haven't told anyone about this publicly, but something that I do, because I'm actually really enjoying the remote team world. My team's been working remotely basically since we started. In fact, the whole team hasn't met each other in person. We've never had that. And so it's interesting hearing businesses that have had to adapt to that world as well. There's something that, and I just made it up, I call it FYM. And FYM stands for fuck yeah moments. And so at the start of every team meeting, I'll ask for FYMs. What's your fuck yeah moment this week? And it can be literally anything. It can be something personally, professionally. It can be a shout out to another team member, literally anything that you want. But it's just something to really get it back to something really positive and exciting and interesting, and just something that it can be something you're passionate about. Like we've had all sorts of things just come up. It's a similar thing that we used to have at the start of daily meetings at another business I worked with. But in terms of actually fleshing out that social environment digitally is quite challenging. And I think that's something that I've found can really get it onto a more relaxed level and relaxed into that state that really it can help get people thinking in another way. And I try to do that myself. And it's something that interests me because that's something that you've just said there you're dealing with. And is there anything that you do or have done that you found has been successful in getting your team in those meetings when you do catch up, to be getting them thinking in the way that you want them to?
I love FYM. I'm definitely using that now, by the way. That sounds awesome. Yeah, 100%.
You heard it first here. You heard it first on Hospopreneurs. There you go.
So what we usually do is as part of those workshops, those internal workshops for ideation, we believe it's one of the most important parts of that entire process. And so we try and come with that, not only with the ideas and the problems and the partners that the founder has, but we always try and come to that with at least one crazy idea that we think might just work, but is probably a little bit too crazy to actually work. But when we go through and we work through some of those and we start to pitch those ideas to each other, we generally find that there is a pearl or a nugget of wisdom that we can use in there that might actually be something that we can use. So if we work backwards from crazy and we start to work towards realistic, we still create something that is innovative, that's a little bit crazy, like we actually come together to solve this particular problem and break through the marketing noise at the end of the day. And that's what we're really looking for.
So in those team meetings, do you have people specifically that you've selected to be more black hatters and shutting down ideas, or do you want everyone to wear all the hats? I can't remember who developed that theory, but do you want everyone to be open to ideas and then cutting ideas back? Or are there specific people that you've selected to be providing those roles in that team?
No, it's completely organic, but ultimately people's personalities really dictate where they sit in a way. It's nothing that we sort of create any rules or restraints or guidelines around, but generally the people that are a little bit more extroverted will be the people that either talk first or have thought about something that's a little bit outlandish that might not necessarily work. But every now and again, you do get people that are a little bit more introverted that have thought about this idea or thought about something, or they've been thinking about an idea that may actually just work for this particular founder, come through with something that absolutely blows us away. And so that does really happen. But we try not to assign roles, and we just let it go organically, because if people are making up ideas that don't work just for the purpose of talking, we generally find that it slows down the meeting and wastes everyone's time a little bit. If you do want to say something, or if you do have something really crazy or something inspirational, something you think might actually work, then we create a safe space for people to actually say it.
And I know I've been getting to the end of the interview for the last few questions.
Ages, yeah.
How do you make that safe space? Like, how do you actually make people feel comfortable in that space to be sharing their ideas? Is that because you said culture was something that was your biggest challenge at the moment, dealing with that team culture, and not just in a digital environment, but I guess it sounds like it's more broadly establishing that culture within the business. What would you provide as a 20% that gives you 80% benefit of something that you would go, okay, this is something that I do to establish that precedent within my team to set the culture?
For me, it's everyone being as open and as vulnerable as possible. One of the things that I try and do as much as I can with the team is just making sure that if I make a mistake, that I'm very open and honest, and I apologize to everyone. Everyone within my team knows that I have ADHD. Everyone knows when I'm low energy, when I'm high energy, when I'm feeling good, when I'm not feeling good, and that type of thing. And because of that, it really does promote everyone to do the same. And if everyone feels like it's not work, that it's play, that we're friends, that we're all trying to come together to do something really great, then that for me really does inspire that creativity and that safe space for people to be able to do those types of things. If people think that it's a job and it's work, and if you say something wrong, you might get fired, you're definitely not going to get the type of ideas and the type of creativity that you need as part of that. It needs to come across as more of a group of friends sitting down trying to create something that is so crazy that it might just work.
Fantastic. On that note, just going to ask the last question of the show today. Sasha, who would you like to hear on the show?
I would love to hear Elon Musk on the show. I just saw what he's been doing recently with Neuralink. And if you haven't seen that product demonstration that came out a couple of days ago, it is crazy. So if there is any way you can get him, please do that, because I'll be the first person to tune in.
I haven't yet reached out to Elon Musk. He is obviously a huge name. If I could get Elon on the show, that'd be fantastic. That's a great idea, actually. And Elon's someone who has revolutionized so many different things and inspired a huge number of people. I'd love to have Elon on the program. So thank you for bringing that one forward, Sasha. Look, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. I've had a great chat, and I'm looking forward to seeing the future that you pioneer with new businesses, the people that you lead into that future. So thank you so much. It's been, again, a pleasure having you on.
No worries, James. Great to be here.
This program is hosted by James Henderson, with technical production by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan and Shim Phelan. Thanks to our distribution team, led by Stephanie Holland, and a special thanks to you for tuning in every week. This program was produced by H Media. We'll see you soon.